culture internationally defines how a meeting should be run. I mean, working in Japan for 6 years was, kind of like a bad kung fu movie. Because I had, been in animation for like 12 years. I'm like, I know how it's done. Like, it's awesome. I'm from MTV. And I got there, and they're like, you don't know anything. We record their voices at the end. And I was like, what are you talking about? So literally in anime, the entire production is done, and the voice actors watch the final animatic and do all of it at the end. And so, again, that was a cultural situation where I had to adjust. And I got a storyboard for a first episode for a Gonzo show, and they said, Eric, can you please give your American notes? So like a nice executive, I put my notes on each storyboard page, and the Japanese guy said, no, you must never write on the storyboard. And I said, why? And he said, because you are the money. And I'm like, what does that mean? And they said, if you write a physical note on a storyboard, and you're a producer, that's a contractual requirement. And they don't like that. So if you have something to say that you think is not going to work for the American market, you have to come to the storyboard meeting, and you must speak personally. You must tell them you don't feel that this shot is good, or you don't feel that this is right, and then they'll actually take your note. So again, being an executive requires that difficult, in Japanese they call it kuki o yonu, right, which is to smell the atmosphere. And if you can't smell the right thing to do, you fall on your face all the time as an executive. So that's executive 101.
Falling on your face.
I just do it.
I had to wear a couple of different hats. I had to be a little bit of what Eric was discussing, as well as a little bit of what Eugene is going to talk about. When I created my own show, I had to be an executive as well as a creative. And that was a unique fusion that it took me a while to figure out, and I made a lot of mistakes, because when you create your own show, and hopefully some of you here will have that chance, you have to be a politician, you have to manage your different teams, your production team, your creative teams, both artists and writers. And that in itself is, you can't really go to school for that, and no company will teach you that. You have to learn on the job. And it's kind of like walking into a constant minefield, because there's always someone who's going to be offended by something you say, or if you have a certain vision, it may not work with production, or it may not work with artists, or it may not work with writers. So this is something that is not easy, and there's a lot of mistakes to be made, but as long as you stay kind of true to your vision without stepping on too many toes, you can usually get a show created. And sometimes you have to err on the side of production, because they are paying the bills, and you have to take notes from executives, because they know the reality of when this has to go to air, or what your budget is, or what your time constraints are. And other times you have to fight for your artists, because you never want to put out a show that looks bad, so you have to kind of give them more time or more people. And sometimes you have to fight for the writers, because you have a certain story you want to tell, and you have to give these guys, and you have to fight against the notes, where often, and I know you've been in this situation, we just talked about it, where networks don't understand the humor or the vision, and you have to fight for that joke, or you have to fight for that line. And again, you have to do that without alienating, the producers. Yeah. So,
Eric Calderon cut one of my jokes recently.
Yeah.
So.
To segue into that, here you go.
It was okay. It wasn't all that good a joke, so I was cool with it. No, some of the things that George was talking about.
not cool with it.
Yeah. George was talking about. I wanted to go back to something real quick, because he mentioned a couple times the term story editor, and that's what George was talking about a lot about. The story editor in animation, at least for the stuff that we do, is basically the head writer. He's the person that deals with the directors and such. Which is kind of confusing, because if you deal with like primetime television, like the story editor on CSI or the story editor on Futurama is actually the lowest ranking writer in the room. But when you're dealing with animation for stuff like Cartoon Network and Disney, the story editor is actually the head writer. So that's kind of a confusing term. But in this case, we're talking about head writer. George is talking about things that head writers got to do, which is work with the network and work with the directors and such. I want to talk about like being ready for like when you get your first chance, because most of the chance you'll get is like you're hoping to get a script assignment. You're usually a freelance script assignment to kind of get your first, get your foot in the door and show what you can do. And generally after that, most of the story editors either will work off recommendations. Like if George is head writing a show, and he'll call me and say, hey, do you know, hey, you work with so-and-so, is he any good? That kind of thing. Your reputation and word of mouth. But also, if you get your first chance, it's going to be your sample script. I want to tell you about sample scripts because that part of the reason I got my Ninja Turtles job was, the manager asked me, hey, what's your best action sample? I said, well, I've got a half-hour action sample. Action comedy? Yeah. Okay, send it. And because I had one ready, I got my, got emailed off, and then the next, 2 days later, I had the job. So being prepared for that kind of thing. So if somebody does say, hey, I am looking for somebody who can do a half-hour comedy, can you? And if you've got a sample, you're way ahead of your competition. If you've got that sample, you want to show that you can do the voice of the show. So if you're writing a 30 Rock, you want it to be funny. If you want to be able to do the voice of the show, you also want to do what you bring to the table as a writer, what you can do. And in many cases a pilot. Well, writers like George and I will be pilots. If you've got a pilot and say, this kind of represents what kind of stories I like to tell. Like, okay, that's fine. That tells us about something, and you work within the conventions and deliver something that's professional. A pilot can be a good sample. Things that are not good samples, fan fiction. Fan fiction. If you like writing fan fiction, great, but it's not. You will not get hired on a piece of fan fiction. I actually had somebody ask me, like, hey, can I send you my Thundercats sample? And I was like, Thundercats? It hasn't aired yet. Nobody knows what the show is like. How do you know what? Oh, you wrote a Thundercats sample based on the previous show. Okay, well, you're not going to be taken seriously with a sample of the script that's the show that's 25 years old.
I want to see that script.
Yeah, exactly. Of course you do. So yeah, fan fiction is not going to get read. But it also, and as far as your sample goes, be yourself, do your voice, write to the show's voice. But also, a key thing, of course, working in animation as opposed to live action is write visually. That's not a problem for most of us and people like yourself who like animation. That's not a problem. But certain writers who come up through, who work in theater or soap operas, they write 3 or 4 pages of dialogue. You can't do it. You gotta think, okay, how can I break this up? If it's just characters walking and talking, the director will come down and kill you. You gotta think visually, try to think of things, and I will come to your question.
We'll keep the questions to the very end. We'll open up as a forum, and you guys can ask us all you want.
Yeah, we'll remember you. Don't worry. Let's see, yeah, and think visually, because if there's anything that artists hate, it's 3 or 4 pages of people talking.
We like it when you think visually. It makes us happy. You're like, oh,
that is very true.
awesome.
Mark, production. What have you learned?
How many people in here have seen Animation Runner Kuromi? No one's seen it.
2, 3, 4.
Okay, so that's essentially what production does, is that we kind of... All right, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's about just this girl who just gets thrown into production, and she has to run around and try to figure things out as she goes. So that's basically... that's basically what I have to do.
Yeah, we do the logistics of the animation production. We do the schedule, the budgeting, making sure everyone's happy, making sure everything's on time. We have to crack the whip. Unfortunately, that's something I don't like to do. And
because everyone's really cool, and there's deadlines, and you got to meet the deadlines, and the execs yell at you, and then you're like, oh crap, the execs are yelling at me, but I don't want Brianne to hate me, so I got to work something out where it's like, when can you get it to me?
If you're in charge of an anime club and you're actually the person who actually makes sure all the meetings happen and all the screenings happen and everything's done and all the food arrives, you're probably a production person.
Yeah, you're most likely the candidate to become a production manager or a coordinator or